You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
This is Ken Vellante with the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast, and she knows it already, but I'm super excited to have LeAnn Pacheco on the show. LeAnn, welcome to Something Rather Than Nothing.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's been a very something I've been very much looking forward to.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. So listeners know, I know LeAnn's voice initially from her reporting, from her work in production on great programs such as Murder in Oregon, Murder in Illinois, Happy Face Presents Two Face, and we're reaching LeAnn from New York City, and she has a background in TV, and she's received 3 Emmy Awards as a daytime TV producer. However, LeAnn, you were saying when we were talking about the career in that piece, you're saying you're recovering from that. So you had a lot of deep experience in that production, but now you're an award-winning podcaster. So how did this all happen?
You know, it's actually interesting. Looking back, it all makes sense. I can't say at any point in my career I've ever really felt I've known exactly what I was doing or supposed to have been doing at the time. But that's part of the growth process as
Sure.
well, I guess. So I got a graduate degree in theatrical production, and I was an English major.
Yes.
And so I spent some early years in New York City. I actually was in a comedy group for a period of time. And some people might be familiar with a comedy group called Broken Lizard. And it was a bunch of guys I had gone to college with. And they went on to make movies like Club Dread and the remake of The Dukes of Hazzard. And I went into broadcast journalism and was a reporter for a number of years for Food Network, and then went into local television in New York and ended up working in daytime television. And as a daytime television producer, yes, I have the distinction of being awarded a couple of Emmys, but the dubious distinction is the fact that those Emmys came from the Dr. Oz show, which hits a little different now in this political landscape
Sure.
than it did at the time.
You can't. The world is bigger than us, you know. So.
The world is bigger than us, but at the time I was working for Dr. Oz, he was a daytime television doctor as opposed to an aspiring politician.
Sure.
And because that's the way ratings work, ended up working on a lot of true crime on that show. Even though it was a health show, there was a salacious and voracious appetite for true crime content. I'm first and foremost a storyteller.
Yeah.
But I've always been drawn to human emotion and stories, and true crime and medical stories give you tremendous potential for both of those things. I think that what I found so frustrating about creating tape for television is I had to condense people into these pithy sound bites. There is an expectation, particularly in daytime television, that you have the audience attention for maybe a minute and 45 to 2 minutes and 30 seconds if it's going to be rolled into a studio show.
Sure.
And so that means that you had to get people to tell you their life story in 20-second sound bites. And that's very difficult to get a deep understanding of the human experience if it's the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah. Well, even my question at the beginning, I'm thinking like, it's like casting a wide net. Like, how the heck do you go from that and doing the podcasting? But, I think there's something in listening to your programs, that you write, research and do, where you end up connecting with somebody's mind or how they tell the story and how what that narrative is. And I think it's fun to look at what would be the hard fact, crass details that you can bump into of murder, corruption, cover up, deep injustice, and those type of thing. But also the creative component of trying to create some sort of coherent way of saying things that don't feel right no matter what. Like, you can't look at the stories that you presented and like you could feel okay about components of it, what people do in response and try to make the situation better, but you can't look at the blunt facts and be like, wow, look at what humans are doing, look at what we're doing. And like, there's a darkness to it. And how do you use your background, in hearing about theater and in the narration, how do you lean into that creativity to tell these compelling stories?
Well, I think it's a really necessary ingredient because, particularly in podcasting, so just to double back 1 second, the way in which I got into podcasting
Yeah.
is daytime television. You have a hiatus, a number of weeks each year that the show is dark. And so a lot of producers take other jobs. And I was offered a job with a rival show. My show didn't want me to take it, and so they asked if I would be willing to make a podcast with one of the contributors on the show, who is Melissa Moore, who is the daughter of Keith Hunter Jesperson, the Happy Face Killer. And so the first podcast I ever tackled was Happy Face. And I was pretty lucky because the trailer for that podcast, so before the podcast even came out, the trailer went to number 2 across all genres.
The
Um,
trailer.
the trailer.
Whoa.
And it was fittingly a ghost story. And I say that because I don't remember if I told you this before or after we started recording, but my grandmother, my mother's mother, my grandkie, was the best ghost storyteller ever. And that was the number one thing you looked forward to when we would visit. She would, if we were lucky, would agree to sleep in between us on the bed until we fell asleep. And then she, snuck out. But she would tell us stories that just captivated our imagination and chilled our bones just
Yeah.
enough,
Yeah.
but not so much that we couldn't sleep that night. And
Leave that
and
to
it
Hollywood.
exactly. It was an incredible talent and skill she had, and one that I grew up really valuing and one that I very much miss. And so it was fitting that that trailer really was a ghost story um, that Melissa remembered from her childhood and her interactions with her father. But I really wasn't familiar with podcasts, so I didn't
Yeah.
know what I should be creating. And that was the biggest blessing in the world because I wasn't trying to emulate anything. I was trying to share a story and had the liberty, the really the joy of being able to do so in a way that I didn't have to condense the personal story into a
Yeah.
20-second pithy soundbite. And so it was really liberating for me. But because I'm a television producer, I wanted to create something you could watch with your eyes closed. And so I like to say that I create very visual podcasts.
I like that
Sound
description. Thanks for saying those words out loud, just of thinking deliberately to do that connected to what you produce. Yeah.
soundscaping is so important. And I don't think I'm really blessed to work with a teeny tiny team. 3 editors, and they are all musicians, and they have that incredible gift for soundscaping, and they
Yeah.
understand. I want to be able to see the story as I listen to it. And I think that my latest podcast, the one we just finished, Murder in Miami, does that to a level that I'm very proud of, and so blessed that I have a team that was willing to go the extra mile to bring it to fruition. They're just
Yeah,
great.
I remember the other question I'll ask, but I want to talk a little bit more. Your team is amazing, and I hear their names on series
It's
over
so
times. Yeah,
Taylor Chacoin is my co-EP, and he is just a great creative hipster musician, editor, incredibly talented guy, lives in Athens. And then Evan Tyre is in Brooklyn, a friend of his. And then Nick Harder, who started working with us on Murder in Miami, is in LA, and he does a lot of the soundscaping you hear. So if you hear the story of our 83-year-old cocaine smuggler, Happy Miles, flying into a storm cloud, and you can hear the plane shaking, that's Nick Harder.
yeah. Thank you for mentioning those folks and grab the opportunity because the work, the combined work, but that's a big piece of the whole feel, and I say that in the real sense of the word, the feel of the show and the way that you describe.
It's also such a team effort, and that's something else that I really love about podcasting. I know it's said a lot and it sounds cheesy, but it is really such um, a supportive, close knit community on some levels, and particularly the team that I work on. There's no ego involved. It's just a shared creative effort, and that's very unique.
Yeah, and that's such an important point, and it's one that I can say professionally that I can recognize the deep importance of having that creative connection in sustained over time as well. So, yeah, great, absolutely, fantastic job, team. But the one piece before we had to finish, telling a little bit more about the podcast and was the thread between the creative, your study in your head around the creative, and kind of like the details within, because and I'll try to explain it the best way I can very briefly. When I hear the shows that you do, and I'm listening to Murder in Miami right now, it's an entertaining story. And when you have an entertaining story tied to things like this, and there's pieces of pop culture, you're like, I feel like a little bit dirty, like, cause I'm cause like you feel like when we're entertained or when we're moved along in that narrative way, we sometimes can be like, wait a second, on the true crime, just that crass element of fact. The show and what you do is right in that territory. So I've been really interested in that creative versus the
Well,
guts.
so one, as I said, I don't approach true crime from a salacious standpoint. I am never going to just do emotional and gore rubbernecking, but I also understand the profound importance of earning someone's ear. And so I know that if I have content that I want someone to take the time to not just consume, but to contemplate, and I want it to resonate, it has to be worth their time. I am always so aware of every single second that goes into an episode, because you're really earning someone's trust that it's worth their time, but you also are asking for their ear. And that's such a tremendous responsibility, I feel, as a producer and as a narrator, because I want someone to feel like it's time well spent. So I go very, very mm, to very great lengths to make sure that the story is as tight as it can be, that it's as entertaining as it can be. I like to write in and out of sound bites in a very specific way, because they're not just being inserted there as filler. They're very, very purposefully picked and crafted, and I feel that that's all part of the ultimate package. So that kind of creativity comes with a great deal of discipline as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would say everybody too, as when you've caught their ear, you also have the classic cliffhanger component audio idea at the end of it. Whereas when folks execute like that, you got people hanging on for the next one. It feels like a classic style in that sense, and I love that, the almost detective piece to it.
I appreciate that. You know what? I think that I think that that comes a bit from television, but it also comes a lot from my dad, who was also a great storyteller, but he was a lawyer as well. So I
Aha.
kind of feel like at the end of
Tell the
at
story that wins.
yes, I feel that at the end of every episode, I have to make my case for why people should want to tune into the next.
Yeah,
So
I got to I'm gonna have to ask you. So we're gonna jump into a couple art questions, but before I do that, I wanted to tell you um, a weird fact about me. I've lived a strange and interesting life. I've lived in different areas of the country. I've worked as a labor organizer, worked in a lot of politics, been around some significant events, and one of the strange facts about me is I've never really been in like TV or done acting or anything like that. I'm just like this character or something. But I was in Washington D.C., actually just outside of Washington D.C. If people are familiar, Arlington, Virginia. And at the time, there was this brew pub called Bardo's, and it was this old auto car dealership, but it had been refashioned into a pool place. I'm going to skip way ahead on this story, but from beginning to end, basically, I ended up as an extra on a TV show. And so I didn't even know at the beginning. We were just approached like, we need an extra for our show downstairs. We're doing a shoot. When I'm in my early 20s, I'm like, what the heck are they asking us to do? Where are we going? And so we go down there, and we still don't know what the show's about. And we're trying to find out, like, what are we extras for? And they pay us in like 2 pitchers of beer and some like fries. And they're looking at us for wardrobe, and they're like, this is America's Most Wanted, Fox hit show America's Most Wanted. We want you in this scene. And I'm like, all right. So now I'm in my head, and my head's already like buzzing. I'm like, well, what look do they want between each of us, right? So they look at my friend and they give him a silver shirt or something. They give another guy, my other friend John, a hat and scruff his hair up. They look at me, they're like, you're fine. And I'm like, wow, what an affirmation. I'm like, I've stumbled upon the America's Most Wanted set, and I don't need wardrobe. And I'm a perfect extra in front of the guy sitting on the pool table who's going to kill his girlfriend in the next scene. That was my.
well, I guess it's either a compliment or a call
I've
to
never known what
reevaluate
it
your
is.
wardrobe.
I've been rattled. I've been rattled ever since. I've never known. I never known what happened. There's one other piece though. I'm looking across. We were approached, I guess you would call, but there's the group of 3 young women, and one's wearing this very ostentatious hat, like somebody's like an actress or doing something wild, and make eye contact. And I'm not even trying to make eye contact. Like, I'm drinking my beer, I'm eating like vegetarian chili. And the first thing she said when she came up to us was, do you want to do a shoot? And I don't know if these gals are, and I don't know if they were talking like shooting up or something, or they were like, and then I'm like, realized quickly it was lingo. They're just, hey, you want to, hop on the film. And it was such a strange, like at the beginning, I'm like, no, we're like totally cool here. I don't know you. You're very bizarre looking, but that's how I was recruited. 2 pitchers of beer and a bucket of French fries.
That's an awesome story. I've always, been so curious for people who do those reenactment scenes, if they end up getting accused of being the actual criminals, if they're out
Maybe
in
that's
public.
why I've had trouble. Maybe that's why I've had trouble for 30 years, because everybody's seen me on the street, remembers that scene, and they're creeped out by me and don't know why.
They can't quite place it,
Oh,
but they think they
goodness.
remember you from a pool hall. Oh, that's funny.
Yes,
That's
that
awesome.
was I thought of that once or twice in listening to your show. I got to tell her the America's Most Wanted story. So I wanted to ask some of the big art questions. This is something rather than nothing show, and you obviously think a ton about what you do creatively, and how you spend your time. One of the one of the questions I ask is, when did you see yourself as an artist, or if it's easier as a creator? People look at themselves different way. But when did you see that's who you were? That's what you were doing.
That's a really great question. I think because, as I mentioned, I grew up very much emulating the storytelling skills of my grandmother,
Yeah.
and knowing that that was of incredible value. And even though she didn't have some kind of highfalutin career or live a very prosperous life, she had that incredible wealth of creativity. And as a kid, I gravitated to that. So I remember writing my first play when
Okay.
I was in the third grade. And of course, it was very self serving because I wrote it for myself and my best friend at the time. And oddly enough, I gave us both leads in the play.
Of course.
It it wasn't very well written, and it didn't ever end up making the stage,
That's
but
okay, third grade Lauren. It's okay. It's fine. You tried
but
your best at that moment. Nothing else could have happened.
it was important enough that it was something that I had to, filter through the papers when my parents ended up moving from the home that they had raised their 5 kids in. So, I always knew that I wanted to create stories, and I was always writing poetry, which sounds so pompous, um,
No, no, it's good. It's good.
but I also knew both sides of Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang.
Yeah.
Um, the radio friendly version and the naughty one
Oh
by the
yeah.
time I was in the 4th grade. So I
Cassette tape.
considered, yes,
Cassette
I
tape
considered
time.
that poetry as well.
Sure
And
was. Sure is.
oh my gosh, the biggest thrill ever was I was lucky enough to produce a podcast called Speed of Sound, which you would
Yeah, yeah.
love.
Yeah,
With,
I've listened. I've
oh
listened
my
to that.
gosh, Steve Greenberg is just like a
It's a great
walking
show. Love that.
musical. Oh, love that show, and
Yeah.
got to track down the living members of the Sugar Hill Gang
I
and
didn't hear that
interview
one.
them.
All
I'll
right.
send it to you. It's so good. It's the birth of hip hop. It's a really great episode, and Steve is just the kind of person I would wine and dine just to sit across the table and listen to him tell
Just listen.
stories.
Yeah, just
Oh
just just
gosh.
just be the sponge, take in the info, right?
He's the guy behind Who Let the Dogs Out. It was his vision that would be the song that would take over the world, and I will be hard pressed to get through a week without hearing that song in some way, shape, or form. And
It
he
worked.
found,
It
yep,
worked.
he discovered
The dogs are
Hanson.
out.
Exactly. Discovered Hanson, discovered the Jonas Brothers, and AJR. And he's just a
Now wait a
visionary.
second. AJR was on that song record player.
Yes, Daisy the Great.
That Yes, Daisy the Great. My goodness. We're gonna bounce a bit here. But yes, I recognize that name from that track, which once you've listened to 25 times and have to put it aside, and then you go back to it like you said you wouldn't go back to it after a couple of days, but you do.
Oh my gosh! And did I send you the video for that too? The anime.
I
It's it's
checked it
it's a
out.
great video. It's a
I
great
checked it
video.
out. But you're talking about on that show and the different folks that he's worked with. And no, I've listened to that. I haven't heard the Sugar Hill Gang one, but I was of the age too, and I was about I was born in '72, so early '80s. Rap, as it was called, it's just rap music. And I remember. I was a break dancer when I was like 11, 12, trying to be a white boy break dancer. And so I was so immersed into the culture of the time. It was the best. We'd get cassette tapes. Somebody's brother would go down to New York City from Providence, Rhode Island on a bus, get the cassette tape of whatever they're playing down in Brooklyn or whatever, they'd be back up, and then they make copies of that tape that week. You know what's playing down in New York City, because it's not like now. There was like a few
No,
rap
no,
songs,
you had,
disco and stuff.
marketing was being selling those cassettes and records out of the back of trunks. But you
Yep.
will love that episode, particularly given your interest in that time.
Awesome.
But
I'm gonna
yeah,
drop
so
into that.
yeah, by fourth grade, I was memorizing every single word of Rapper's Delight. So I think I always knew, to be perfectly honest, that I wanted to create content that resonated with people and held their attention.
Yeah.
I went to college and was an English major, theater minor. I went to, as I said, graduate school for theatrical production, and
Fantastic.
and knew that I just wanted to create content.
What school did you go to for theatrical production?
London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art,
Oy vey. Wow, that's awesome.
which was a nice experience to live outside of the United States for a little while too, and I got to travel, and then I came back and I ended up moving back to New York, and working there and staying there in radio and television. And so, because I started out in radio, I really feel like podcasting is full circle in a weird way.
Yeah, I like to see the story, like the formats and the storytelling of how you tell a story. I think I've become interested in it because I never expected to do stuff on audio myself, and it's like on there's one bit about what you said about going in and doing podcasting, which I really connect to, because I was talking to somebody about this, that when I started podcasting, I didn't like podcasts. Like, I like some of them. I liked a few, and like nothing against it, but I wasn't like down with it. I wasn't hearing a ton where I'm like, this is like this medium or something. I didn't understand it. I wasn't that much into it. So I didn't listen to much except anyone that did on Richard Simmons, like that Finding Richard Simmons one. I lost my mind over that one. I probably listened to it 5 times, um, but I didn't know. So when I went into this doing a podcast, which is a curious thing for anybody to try, I didn't know anything whatsoever about structure outside of maybe how I might structure it, or maybe how they did it on 60 Minutes, or how Johnny Carson did it, or whatever, like however you talk to people and do that type of thing. But it became really interesting to me because as I've done it, I've been connected more with the collective aspect of it, like the organizing, the how do I get to talk to somebody from Wellington, New Zealand, a Maori writer who does science fiction. How did that happen? And how does that happen now at this time in like complete potential? So journeying, going, using a medium at first to do something and then engaging within it and saying, holy shit, I got on the right street, right? Like the traffic's over there. Like I'm on a good street here, and just staying on that street. But I found it very interesting to say when you bopped over it, you had some leverage. It sounded like in getting, the show, and they wanted you to do the show and not compete. And then you pulled it together the way that you felt it should go together as a story, right? And that's how you learned it.
Yeah, I think that also my strength or value, I think, as a producer in television, um, really was I was always more interested in the people rather than the story or the ratings the story could generate. I really care deeply about the people who entrust me with sharing their story. And I think because of that, it made it easier for me to create content that had an emotional pull, even without the visual cues.
Yeah.
You can watch an interview on television and see from the cutaways of the producer or the reporter interviewing the person that you were being prepped for an emotional question, and you don't really have those, smoke and mirrors with audio. There has to be an authenticity.
There has to be something behind it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, there has to be a connection, not just with the people speaking, but with the listener as well. And so I think that because I've always taken that responsibility to heart, that maybe plays into the authenticity of the content.
Yeah, and that authenticity, and you connect into the human piece of it. I do a lot of human to human work, and I think about like this idea of like interviewing or conversation, and like I don't know what other conversation. It sounds strange to say. I don't know what type of conversations other people like have. Like if I look on like podcasting and the content, and just maybe in my show, it's 6 days of, which is a big thought and all that type of thing. But the other piece is that being a labor organizer and actually repping tens of thousands of workers who, when they talk to me, I have to establish a quick relationship with them, be of help in advocacy and understanding and compassion and advocate. So whatever I can be handed in that realm is anything in the world, including the psychological state of the person who's experiencing the work trouble, the addictions. It's not all dour. There's glory in these type of things, but I'm saying in the needs in the conversation. So I found myself prepped to have any conversation in the entire world. Like, and when I go on the street, people talk to me about stuff. You'd be surprised. I don't know if it happens to you, but like people just like, hey, this, and I'm like, why me? You don't know me. And I kind of look like a strange guy, and I don't sound like I'm from around here. I'm from the other side of the country. But I just found that dynamic so fascinating to me of how you have a conversation. And with your background, the amount of people you would come in contact with, all different parts of society, how you're able to have a conversation, there's just something to it that's, if it's authentic, there's something to it there that's kind of tough to describe.
Well, you know what? I think that honestly, to be a great conversationalist, you have to be an even better listener. And I think that people know when they're being listened to.
Yeah.
Um, and interestingly enough, um, I do think that there is a lot of content out there. There is no shortage of podcasts where it's literally just two people shooting the shit over a microphone. And sometimes it does feel like content for the sake of content's sake, that they're just trying to fill time because they have to have a daily amount of. But I when I listen to your podcast, it's so there's so much thought and appreciation that goes into the topics and the people that you pick before you even utter a word to them. So I think that it's that intention as well. And I think you attract a very specific listener for that reason. And I think that, look, there are plenty of people who do want to listen to podcasts to kill time. There other people who really want to invest their time in listening to something and want it to reward them with a greater understanding or knowledge. And so that's really what I think you're creating.
Thank
And
you.
I appreciate and value that.
I appreciate what you have to say, and it does mean a lot, and I have no trouble telling you that. Um, and I think that's the piece here in being able to talk about podcasting and a connection we probably have is not only to produce, but there's larger issues like at hand. So I was thinking in thinking about seeing your work and having chatted before about justice and the philosophical backdrop for this in some of my training. So my training is in English lit. Yay, English lit forever. In philosophy. And I studied philosophy. I got a master's in philosophy at Marquette University. I did my labor studies over at the University of Massachusetts, master's in science. But one of the things I wanted to say was at Marquette I studied Plato. We had to study 4 big philosophers: Plato, Aristotle, boom, boom, Aquinas, St. Thomas Aquinas, and Immanuel Kant. We had to study those 4, and I'm glad I studied each of them. But within Plato, there's this, kind of common or grand idea is that, there's this great work, The Republic, which is a massive work popular in Western culture basically about what is justice, right? And the psychological idea literary folks or philosophers put out is that Plato sees an unjust society in Greece. That unjust, faulty society kills a great man like Socrates who is seeking truth. What's wrong, right? So this work psychologically is thought to be what type of society is just and which one doesn't kill Socrates, but elevates Socrates in the curious mind. And so I've become just really deeply interested in the stories you tell, but the underlying question of the belief in justice, the belief in what is just and what is right. And in your reporting, the difficult but important exposure to there ain't no fucking justice anywhere that you're seeing. I remember your description of one story, like you uncover another thing, you're like, good gosh, there's another layer here that somebody didn't do, or another layer that celebrated this false story, and so I think like that's such at the nub, and I know what you talk about is justice, and I don't mind that it's a big backdrop for the question because it's Plato is trying to, what is justice, but what does that drive in your investigation and you doing podcasts for justice? What's that mean for you now? Where's that fit in the story that you're telling that there are some wildly unjust, wrong structures and practices, say in the United States?
Well, I think that a great deal of my personal drive comes from the fact that I mentioned that my dad was an attorney, but um, he also was a ridiculously good one. He was first from Colgate, second from Harvard Law. He was
Ooh.
editor of the Harvard Law Review, and then he was head of the chair of the board of ethics for the New York State Bar Association. And I remember going to his corner office, with dark mahogany and
Yeah.
leather. And above all was this gigantic drawing of a lawyer standing in front of a cowering man in rags, basically, and justice behind him holding a scale and a blindfold. And I always thought that the legal system was put in place to protect the weak and the vulnerable, and very much believed that everybody involved with the law on both sides of law enforcement and the judicial aspect had everyone's best interests in mind. I was really naive. And I think that as I've had the opportunity to really tackle more convictions, you really realize how broken the system is when you realize the number of potential wrongful convictions, and that when, unfortunately, our system decides that you're guilty, it is designed to move forward at lightning pace. But when it realizes that it's made a mistake, it will double down, and it corrects itself at the pace, I like to say, of a frozen slug. It takes, there's a great organization that's a Jesuit, founded by a Jesuit priest called Centurion, and it's one of the oldest innocence organizations. And I think their stats are that, in general, if someone is actually innocent, so in cases of actual innocence, it takes on average 8 years and $350,000 to get that person out of prison. And that's with actual innocence.
It's almost difficult to comprehend either side of it. Time and money.
I am been fortunate enough to get to fill in for a man named Jason Flom, who has an incredible podcast called Wrongful Conviction.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I've guested for him.
Great job, by the
And
way. I heard it. Yeah.
oh, thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. The last one that I just taped, which hasn't aired yet, is a man named Lamar Johnson, who was wrongfully convicted in Missouri and spent nearly 29 years in prison. And they knew between the time he was convicted and sentenced that two other people had actually committed the murder and had admitted to it. 28 years. It's
Like, what's the
heartbreaking.
mechanism when you look on the outside? I've heard some of your descriptions. It's like this frustration of looking at, like, is there a key that unlocks? Like, is there a truth key? Like, is there here the things are here that shows it was not the case? Can we put it into you can't put, pay to enter.
Well, but you know what? I think it goes back to, Plato and Socrates. When you are asking the big questions and you are up against a system where they're like, the system is the system and the system works because it's a system. And there's prison for profit. And you have prosecutors who are allowed to incentivize witness testimony. That's allowed. You can't do that for the defense. You can't get somebody to go on the stand and lie because you're paying them and get away with it legally. But the prosecutors can. And they're more interested in winning than in justice.
And that's that. And I didn't mean to jump in there, but I mean the what I was able to see. I remember I lived in the DC area in the 90s, and all those super crime, super predator, like that ethos and stuff. It was fucking disgusting. It was like I couldn't believe how many, like, I could palpably see. And this is not like anti-cop thing. I'm not getting into all that. I'm saying, like, I could actively see patrols all the time in a regular working class neighborhood. I was like, there's so many cops like all around here in DC. I'm like, my goodness. And the explosion of prosecutions. And I did some deep research on what you're talking about, of the private money incentive within prisons and prison labor. So it's just, I'm a labor union guy, right? So obviously going to get pissed off at 13 cents an hour labor of people who are getting shoved into prisons who haven't done anything wrong. But it was this acceleration that I've seen over the like last 20, 25 years, and quick changes. And for me, it feels that it's accelerated a problematic core. Like with private money, like to buy a stock on a stock market at a value and potentially make money of value that's derived from essentially chattel labor in prisons. Like what else? What else? Where do I get my next penny? Like, I don't know.
It is a modern sanitized spin on slavery.
It's really incredible. The incarceration numbers and stuff, I even seen it like when I remember looking when I was younger. I wasn't looking at those stats or anything, but it was just growing and growing and growing. And then the per capita per year. And here's the thing is, Lauren, is we all have different experiences. But when I was in elementary school and I was screwing around with my brown and black friends, they got in trouble. I never got in trouble. What do you think happened when I was screwing around after going to the bar when I was in my 20s, right? My friends who'd get in trouble. I'm not saying it was just like that. I'm saying there was the same dynamic. I could get away with things. I might have the chance to get away with things.
There,
But that
there,
was,
there, there was. There's no shortage of stories that I, personally have firsthand knowledge of white frat boys getting caught with drugs, and having their records taken care of because their affluent parents were able to pull some strings and make some donations. And then you have the prison filled with, young men and women of a different shade who
yeah,
didn't have the same privilege. And they're paying for it with life sentences, even in states where marijuana is now legal. And that's what they were initially arrested for.
yeah,
It's, you talked about the meaning of justice, and I was asked that question on a previous podcast. And I have to say that the answer I've settled on is justice is not one size fits all.
yeah,
Unfortunately,
yeah,
you have very different rules for different people of different levels of privilege in our society. And we have to understand, acknowledge, and admit that before we can start fixing the system.
yeah,
And I also think that there should be a lot more empathy and compassion when we look at criminal activity, because it's not a level playing ground.
yeah, yeah. I really hear that, and no, thanks for mentioning that too. And I think at the root of it is that folks, a lot of good-hearted folks, who don't buy the narrative, the race drug narrative, who question that type of thing it's really important to do, because even if you believe with certain components of policing, say in the American setting, like just like a middle ground, like if you agree with certain components, you have to agree that the thing is transmogrified beyond understanding that could have been 30, 35 years ago. When you see military type things on American streets for dissent, it isn't like agree or disagree. It's being like, what the hell? Like, why is it all that? So it feels different. So I think you can maintain a reasonable position. It's like things seem to be so far beyond structurally and in the infrastructure or something. I don't know.
It's interesting. I think it's kind of insidious because it almost becomes like a frog swimming in gradually boiling water. The frog won't jump out. It almost loses its ability to feel the increasing heat level until it's too late. I think that because of the media and because of the content coming out of Hollywood that is, you know, broadcast into our homes, we are used to seeing an increasingly militarized version of law enforcement. And so it's not as jarring when we see it up close and personal. Go back to, the early childhood days of, oh, good God, I'm trying to think of, what was it with Gomer Pyle
Oh yeah, sure.
yeah, that
Smack
was
your
a,
cap on your head. Oh, come
that
on.
was a, that was a very
Really?
different kind of
Yeah.
sheriff,
Yeah.
that might as well be, the bully, the bully stick, you know, not an assault weapon,
Right. Right.
not a military grade assault weapon. And kids today are growing up, seeing law enforcement officers carrying increasingly more advanced militarized weaponry. And
Yeah.
so
It's
it's not as shocking, but if it's not the Andy Griffith
well,
days of
for me,
policing.
as an activist for myself, it's always like the counterbalance. What the hell do you have to protect so fiercely? And why the hell are the people so pissed off at this particular moment? Period.
There's
Like,
there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of outrage in the world. There really is.
all
Um,
right. I wanted to jump in a bit here, Lauren. Uh, talking about art and its role and we've been talking about activism in the search for justice. But what I wanted to ask you is, what is art, and also what do you think art's role is? And we're talking here in March 2023. The world feels different to me and a lot of people that I talk to than it did a few years ago. Is the role change? Is the role different now? So art and its role today.
Oh, what a little question.
Yeah, this is the baby one leading to the big
That's
one.
not a big question at all. No, that's a great question, and it's a huge one. So I guess for me, I would have to say that art is pure expression. And I think that there is something about that that is very universal in its humanity, but also I think that it transcends culture, time, and place. Um, and so, in a way, it's kind of the antidote to the Tower of Babel. you know,
Yeah, yeah.
it unifies us. Art is expression, and it's unifying. And I feel that it is an expression that connects emotionally. Um,
I love that. Now, the one of the things about the question connected to with the role of art, I mean, I think I could speak for myself, and like, I remember a particular moment, like, I started the show before the pandemic. Then the pandemic was on, and entertainment changed, and people talking changed, or what they want to do, or could feel psychologically they could do change. Like all these things changed with the show. But one of the things is I began to wonder amidst all these changes. I think one way is easy to say is like, look, human beings, like whenever they're around, like the sky is always falling in for some reason, right? It's like there's some cataclysm or apocalypse or revelations, and it just happens. This is the way humans are. And they do that to create a finite amount of time so they can derive meaning for life, or, you know, whatever that is for. But what I wanted to see from you is it different now? I mean, we had a discussion about justice. It seems more difficult, seems more wrong. Climate, it's getting hot. We see weird weather, whether we want to believe it or not, and things are happening. So when you're going to make your podcast and you're creating your things, is it different now? Is it the struggle that the same?
that's interesting because I feel like there is something that makes it more important than ever to create content that resonates. So maybe the concept of audio activism that I'm striving for is because I feel that there needs to be a purpose, and I feel that it's important to harness art for a reason. And maybe that sounds pompous, but it's also something that there's a responsibility, I feel, that time is more valuable, or at least it feels so. Maybe it's because
Right.
I'm getting older. Maybe it's because it feels more precarious. But I do know that there seems to be, as we said earlier, there is no shortage of anger and outrage in the world. I want to use my efforts and my time to create and support other creators who are trying to maybe ease that a bit. I
Yeah.
want to bring more healing and more connection, um, and more good to the extent that I can. And that's why I think that I've gravitated towards what I have, because it seems to be a good combination of my skill set.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see hear something in there as far as like that hope for good. Like I was listening to this podcast. I might not have the exact title down. It was, on soul recovery, right? And it sounds a particular way, but there's this brilliant point she had made in it, and it really hit me at the time that I had heard it. It had to do with like how you're spending your time during the day, and when you spend it very differently, and when you open up space that is geared towards physical sunlight, the sunlight, hope, that I'm going to try to go at positive intent and be like, I'm going to be a pleasant or something about your day that's just a reorientation because of moving that way. And the just fundamental point I heard, which really meant a lot to me, was the space that shakes up and creates is where you end up trying to project. End up projecting that out. You're inhabiting that. And I think within podcast and within organizing, within search for justice, like that question, it seems silly to talk about, but heck, it always did. It did in the Greeks. It did right now, saying what the search for, justice is that there's something inspiring or passionate or curious and hopeful. And I know it might be an age thing. When the pandemic first started, my reaction was, we're all going to friggin' die and I haven't done shit yet. That was my reaction. Now I had done stuff. I wasn't getting down on myself. I've had a storied career serving people in labor for the longest time. But I'm like, no, that's not. And so whether it was creating art in whatever way that I did, I'm like, the bell's been rung for me, and it rang once that pandemic came down. I thought it was going to wipe us all out. So once I heard the bell, I can't unhear it. And it's added a greater urgency or a desire for pulling myself out of the mire and the muck and saying, yes, that's there. I can tell you all about it. But that redirection of energy. And when you bring that into the show and you talk about justice, it's a challenge to bring up the word. That's what a philosopher does. That's what a thinker does. And I think it's inspiring. I think it's right oriented. Like, I'm not trying to convince myself, but I'm like affirming what you're saying. I think it's right oriented, and people feel good and being like, shit, it feels like we're going to try something about this, or I don't know.
Yes to all of that. Actually, there's also, we talk about intention. And so one of my previous podcasts, Murder in Illinois, I revisited the case of Christopher Vaughn, who was convicted of killing his wife and 3 children. And we re-examined whether or not there was the possibility that he was wrongfully convicted. And the podcast very much comes out on the side that he was wrongfully convicted. I took so much heat for revisiting that story. I was targeted on social media. Even if you look at that podcast now, it has evenly between 1 stars and 5 stars. People either thought it was a, good use of their time, or quote unquote the worst podcast ever made.
No middle ground there.
Oh gosh, people accused me of taking on the story because it was my intention to leave my husband and kids and go marry Christopher Vaughn, and that's why I wanted to get him out of prison. I mean, some really ugly stuff was tossed my way. The beauty of it is, though, that now I'm about to do an update episode because very notable innocence projects are backing him. And there is a very significant swell of support because other people now understand what I saw and validate what we were able to uncover in that podcast. And that ties back into the audio activism. So even that, though that was an uncomfortable commitment to make, to take on a Family Annihilator case, and even though I was criticized and really hung out to dry for a long period of time, it's ended up coming full circle because of the audio activism aspect, that there are now thousands of people who have joined the Mother's Facebook page and created a whole community,
Yeah,
and
starting to
people,
do something. Yeah.
yeah, and offering their skills and talents to assist his
Yeah.
new legal team, and so that makes me ultimately, it restores and renews my faith in the greater good. It really does, because it shows that when the legal system has failed, that something as simple as podcasting can become another court in which to retry a case
Yeah.
in the court of public opinion, and by drawing attention to it again, perhaps compel the people in positions of power to reevaluate something that was a mistake.
Yeah, and I think it's that area. I mean, I think you're going to be tightly tied to the changes in press media. I would say that throughout my life, I've seen significant changes. Print media being when I was younger, and newspapers and those type of thing, and all those things have radically changed in the different forms. So the question is, like, where do I get my information from? How do I learn something? I heard people mentioning, which I hadn't heard in conversation, like, rather than Googling it, they're like, I wanted to learn how to do something. They're like, oh, just check out a podcast that talks about that. And I was like, wow, that's interesting that people are answering the questions of how to do something by potentially listening to podcasts. And that just indicated to me that people are like, somebody must have covered this. Let me listen to it for a while, which is a curiosity.
That's interesting, but it's also kind of dangerous, right? You know,
Who shall guide? Who shall guide you? Who shall guide you? Right?
Well, because, it depends what kind of look. The content that I create, because it goes through iHeart, has to be scrutinized by a legal team. I don't just get to say what I want to say without being able to provide backup, and it's vetted. And
Yeah.
so there is a greater level of authority that has to sign off on what I say. Anybody can put out a podcast, and so you don't have a
Yeah.
lot of vetting going on.
Yeah. That's
But
a good
I
point.
also think when we were going back to the difference in journalism, because of popularity that we started talking about in the beginning with music, you have stuff is being dictated by search engine optimization. So it's more about what people are clicking on websites, that ultimately is driving the content for a lot of mainstream news. And so it's difficult to know.
Well, it's my analogy. Is the bookstore analogy, and it's like, when if you know what you're looking for exactly, then you already have it, right? It's that Plato riddle in there. And then if you don't know what you're looking for, you're not going to be able to pull it in when you see it. So there's this discovery in encountering, like on bookshelves in an environment, of being like, I don't know what I'm going to find. I need to be situated in the right place for these things to happen, and a podcast might be that type of thing for learning, or yeah. And it's also not, for podcasting, everybody does it for different reasons, but I think it leads to some misconceptions because, I mean, I'm almost not the way that I do it, but 50-year-old, like, white appearing male podcast. Wow, this sounds super exciting. Let me run towards this, but it's, there are people who are committed to it, doing podcasts over time, and those are podcasters over time. And there's 4 trillion other things. No shade on anybody. Everybody give it a go. But yeah, there are those things, but there's a difference between, sustained creation and exploration and not. That's all. And I see and bump into a lot of great shows where folks are committed to their learning or their mission and what they're doing. And that's why I get excited about a field now that I was like, this is where I'll get to talk and meet some interesting people like Lauren Bright Pacheco or whatever.
But you know what? But look, that in and of itself, gosh, sign me up for any field where I get to meet exciting, interesting people.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that is what makes me tick. I love listening to people. I love talking to people. So I guess I've kind of found my perfect field.
There we go. We're both well situated at the moment. I wanted to ask you about the murder in Oregon, and it's a strange way. What I wanted to do is mention some impressions that I had on it,
Okay.
and I'll also mention a curious listening habit, so it'll be worth your while. So, listen to Murder in Oregon, and folks, listeners, by Lauren Bright Pacheco. You can find it all your podcast places, but it's. I'm not going to give all the details. I'm going to tell you my impressions. So it's about a murder killing of the head of the Department of Corrections at the end of the 1980s in Oregon. Now, I grew up out east in Rhode Island, and I've been in Oregon for about 10, 11 years, so I don't know the stories that would have popped up. And hearing about it, it was just such a heart-wrenching and scary exposition of true corruption, cover-up, silencing, erasing. That's the story. But it had this eerie piece to it. I'm in Albany, Oregon, 20 minutes away from Salem, and I was able to go to the spot where there's the memorial, and I felt super weird all of a sudden. The reason why is because I could hear your description throughout Murder in Oregon. And I didn't know. You're always like, this is close, it's nearby, talking about the situation, how events happen in proximity, but then standing there and saying, holy shit, like I'm in the spot now. And my way of understanding was conceptual, what you told me, but it's very much placed now. So the strange listening habit with Murder in Oregon also happened with another podcast I listened to, is that I listen to podcasts at night sometimes. My partner, Jenny, who falls asleep before I do, and I listen to the whole podcast. And then the next day, if she's fallen asleep too early, maybe within the first 50 minutes, I listen to it again. So, anyways, I'm a repeat listener of your podcast because of my relationship habits. I probably listened to the last couple. I tell you no word of a lie, because of this strange habit. I've probably listened to at least the first half of the episodes of Murder in Miami at least 6 times a piece.
Oh my gosh. You
Because
sound like
I'm
me.
still awake. I'm still awake. I'm like, I'll just finish the episode again.
You sound like me because Phil Stamford, who is the former journalist for the Oregonian, who is the reason why I did Murder in Oregon, and ultimately the reason I ended up doing Murder in Miami.
Yeah.
He said, how many times do you listen to each episode? And kid you not, I'm probably in the 30 to 40 times, because every single thing I tweak back and forth. So good. You're next to me and my editors. You're probably the person who's listened to it most.
I gotta admit too, just to add on, I just released an episode of Melissa Oliveri yesterday, and now I'm starting to notice in consecutive things like these obsessions. I talked about my obsession with albums, and when I get a new album, of listening to an entire album every day for a period of time. And I described openly and with deep pride listening to Taylor Swift's 1989 for 18 straight months, once a day, every day. So what I'm saying is I probably eased into this weird habit of, okay, let's do it again. And it's at nighttime anyways, so it's all nighttime, so it doesn't matter. But it wafted into my head 5 or 6 times. So no ill effects yet, unless you can identify any.
I would say with the Taylor Swift thing, I think my daughter could give you a run for your money. She's 21 and Taylor is her end all be all. And then I will tell you that my husband would probably say that he feels sorry for you because you next to him probably has to hear my voice the most before you fall asleep at night. I'm the queen of saying, are you still awake?
Oh, it is.
and talking to him, keeping him up at night.
Yeah, no, that is the voice thing. I think for anybody who tries to create and perform is like is super strange. I know that there's this idea within a podcast and in transcript where there's a verbal word representation of the work that we do, and then those words are compiled. And I'm like, I've been talking on this show for an amount of like almost a week if you listen to it together. And I said, I'm a little bit scared, a little bit inspired to find out what word was mentioned 3,620 times over.
Going back to you standing at the Dome building, because you sent me a picture when you were there. You texted it to me. It was very interesting because I had read so much and researched so much and spoken to Michael Frankie's brothers, Pat and Kevin, so many times before I actually got to go there. And I went and visited it with them. And, they have a very different, it's become a place where they go to connect with their brother now. It's a way of feeling connected to him. And I think it's really a big part of why Kevin is still in Salem. But I felt it too when I stood there with them. That is still, to me, to have a public official who's assassinated outside the building where he works the night before he was going to present his findings on corruption within his department in front of a legislative committee on the topic.
That's radical.
And it remains unsolved. And the only thing we know, Ken, for sure, is that Frank Gable did not kill Michael Frankie.
Right. That's the one thing you know for sure.
Yeah. But they're not looking for the people who were actually responsible because it's too inconvenient and too messy. And that goes back to injustice. That goes back to corruption. That goes back to...
Well, there's a disproportional... So I'm at that site and talking about that. It's disproportional for me because I can tell you, because I think unique responses to this type of thing in similar experience are interesting. So I had started by being over at the Salem Hospital, which is connected to the filming of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And it's a very unique, fascinating experience for me. And there's a lot of energies. I saw 2 people saging themselves walking out of that place. It's Oregon, but, because it's just weird. And I couldn't find where the dome, I know Salem a little bit. It's kind of a mystery to me, but I didn't know where. I've been around there, but I'm usually popping here, and somebody's telling me to go there. And over by the memorial, and I tell you, for me, the proportionality was by hearing. And I'm not trying to idolize. I only know the story from you, and I know, but seeing somebody who represents, I am going to call out the filth in this system, and I'm going to do it against the most powerful. And then he's off. But for me, knowing that was behind it, I walk up and want a statue. And it's a strange statue time. I want a statue, and that's what I want. That's what I want to see. I want to see something that's there. And he has a memorial, and that's very meaningful. And they're beautiful objects. And it was a different experience. And it was probably even better. But I was just telling you, my initial reaction was being like, there was something bigger that was represented here, and this is humble and this is small, but sometimes small is for a very particular reason, and it was complicated.
So the really interesting thing about that statue is that it was created by inmates. And I guess we should describe it. It's
Wow.
really
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like a
Go ahead.
plaque that almost
Yeah,
looks like a podium,
yeah,
and it has this really beautiful metalwork surrounding it that is almost an inlay and a sculpture at the same time of vines going up the side of it. And so it looks like it's almost kind of sprung from the earth. So
yeah,
it is very kind of organic and very much a part of the landscape at the same time. And so it's very beautiful. And
yeah.
yes, I stood there with Pat and Kevin, and they like to go there and share a beer with Mike. And so if you go there and there's a can of beer, don't take it as a sign of disrespect. It's probably something that's been left by one of his brothers.
Yeah, it's like going to Kerouac's grave in Lowell, Massachusetts.
Or Morrison's grave in
Oh my
Paris.
gosh. Yeah. My brother lives over in Lowell, Massachusetts. Last time I was visiting him, I was able to go by the Kerouac stuff. Which I adore. So yeah, that was thank you for, and it was nice to share with you because I think sensitivity to stories as a listener, sensitivity to injustice, things going wrong, not being able to get rid of the pissed offness residue, after things is a real experience. And so I found it, very, very powerful in that. And the quest for justice within that show, listeners, from unexpected directions and support and people standing up, it's very inspirational, as difficult it is to move through. It's not inspirational about the justice system per se, inspirational about people fighting.
Yeah,
uh,
I was really humbled by the people who were willing to speak with me for that,
yeah,
because they did so knowing that it would create serious levels of discomfort within some of the social circles that they moved in.
sure,
and
sure.
and it's always very inspiring to me when people in positions of power do the right thing for the sake of doing it.
Yeah, yeah, it's yeah, thank you so much. I wanted to ask you the big question because I don't want to linger in out there too much, like, longer. I never know when to ask it. It's one of those philosophical thud questions, but I know you got it. Is the why Lauren Bright Pacheco? Is there something rather than nothing?
Because there has to be.
Yeah.
There has to be. Otherwise, what's the point?
What's the point? I love creating some things, and I know you do. I know the power of you know, or at least I'm connecting to the deeper potential of what art does for us, and seeing remapping brains and seeing what hope, kind of inspiration, because it isn't there's stuff to get down over. It's been in spades for a while for a lot of folks. It's about, like, being inspired by the idea, and, like, even for us predicating the conversation obviously in my head on Plato, and who, when it comes to art, is one of the greatest writers I think in the Western tradition as far as a storyteller, but also, like, the deep explorations of, you must consider the answer to the question, what is justice, in order to try to arrive at it. And after I had been thinking about more of this question with you, I ran into speculative science fiction, indigenous science fiction by B.L. Blanchard, called The Peacekeepers, which presented a theoretical model of a non-colonized Americas. And one cool thing was, Lauren, was I didn't have to delve with the questions. A lot of questions you brought up right then, I was able to delve with them speculatively, only because the sequence was I was reading about a future, a written future, or a different alt history, and was able to engage with the same type of questions. Like, there was a restorative justice model, but they're like, this shit isn't like perfect either. Like, don't worry about it, you know? So I was able to explore in a speculative way some of the very issues that we're talking about. And I'm like, oh gosh, I'm glad how that worked out. It made me feel a little bit better.
Well, that's a good one, because you know what? Look, the truth is that there is no such thing as perfection if it's created by humans. We're imperfect by nature.
Yeah.
And so there has to be the struggle of striving for something that's closer to perfection. And maybe that is why there's something rather than nothing.
There we go. We
It's
hit it one way or
that
the
striving.
other. You
Yep.
get three dart throws. You get 3 dart throws at each round. So we've been talking with Lauren Bright Pacheco, and Lauren, I wanted to say is a little bit early. I know you're very busy and do a lot of things. We've been talking for a bit, but I very deliberately said I'm not even going to interrupt or allow for stopping, so I just kept recording. But what I wanted to ask you, Lauren, if you could convey to the listeners, just, your podcast is everywhere, but what you'd like to say, how you'd like to tell folks how to encounter the work that you do, the work that you've done.
Well, you can find me on iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And I am on Twitter, where I'm trying to be a lot less political than I have been in the past.
I don't even know what you do on Twitter. No recommendations, but thank you.
Yeah, I'm not exactly a huge Twitter presence, but I am there. I also am on Instagram, but it's a private account because I got so many threats when I was doing murder in Illinois that I just made it private.
Not everybody was asking you, why is there something rather than nothing in there?
No, exactly.
No.
They were wishing death on myself and my children.
It's horrible.
It is horrible, but you know what? The good news is, as I said, there is really momentum behind getting Christopher Vaughn, who is an innocent man. And I can't think of the only thing worse than what happened to his wife and 3 children is the thought that he could have been wrongfully convicted for their murders. And that's what's happened. And so I'm willing to take some nastiness on social media if it means doing something good for somebody who was
it's a tough process. I've spent some time as a union organizer in my days, and I don't know, just on the top 2,000 professions, I'm not sure where we rank when it comes to we're loved by some, and not well liked by many others. So it can be difficult when there are threats for what you're representing, what you're trying to do, and those are significant. It's not an easy thing, but I think everybody, when you're fighting or you're upholding a belief system or pursuing something, there's going to be a couple rocks that come in at 60 degrees from a direction you didn't expect, and it's unsettling, but you carry through it. But hey, and if anybody gives you any trouble, Lauren, just let me know, all right?
Yeah. I got a friend who knows some union people.
This isn't the LA people calling the NYC people. I'm in rural Oregon, and but yeah, of course, find the podcast all the places. And what about the couple podcasts that people might not be aware of that I mentioned that you have more of a production role? Yeah,
I also have been pretty fortunate to work with some really incredibly talented people. LeAnn Rimes, the country western superstar, is also a really wonderful human being with a very interesting interest in spirituality and spreading goodness into the world.
Sure.
And she has a great podcast. called Holy Human. And then Steve Greenberg has an incredible podcast called Speed of Sound,
Yeah.
which we did a season on, and I'm hoping to get another season. And then I also have a medical mystery podcast called Symptomatic, and that draws attention to the struggles that people face when they are dealing with illness that can take decades to properly diagnose.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for mentioning those. And, I think if you do, a lot of high quality things like you've done over time, and you have different roles within it too. It's one of the things is I've done the show and just deeper learning in newer areas because it's a variety show. I don't have deep background in opera. I have a healthy, curious interest, and I learn as I go. But it's just like trying to navigate and explore. Thank you for mentioning all those options. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about my America's Most Wanted extra story, which I think I saved for you. I'm like, she's going to be the one that's gonna like this.
I want to see the clip now.
Um,
see the tape.
I will. I've been looking at some of the videos that I've done in the past, and I got to tell you, I ran into one where I played the CEO of Chase Manhattan Bank, Jamie Dimon, in Street Theater in Madison, Wisconsin, in 2010, and it was a performance that I forgot about, but I liked it. It was quite.
Send it.
I'll send that. It still exists on video, so we'll definitely share that. I mean, I guess it was indication when I was doing the labor stuff back then. I wanted some more showman type of opportunities than were presently being granted. So that was a lot of fun. But thank you so much for your time. I do really view it as a distinct pleasure to connect with what you create, but just talking about the bigger stuff that I try to on this show, and also the enthusiasm for podcasting and hearing how you moved into it and grow and learn about how you want to tell stories within it. It means a lot to hear that and to have this connection with you, Lauren. So I just wanted to let you know that before you depart.
I appreciate that. It's really, really been nice getting to know you better and to having this conversation.
Yeah. All right. So everybody check out Lauren's podcast. Highly recommended. You don't have to, I'm not obligating listeners to 6 listens or downloads per episode, as might be the case with me. If you want to approach the world in a more understandable for outsiders way of going about the world, you can listen to it once. But thank you so much, Lauren, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Absolutely.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing.